The United States is currently the richest and most militarily powerful nation on Earth. But if you rewind a few centuries, the exact landmass that powers this modern empire was essentially viewed as a useless stretch of dirt. This map shows how the early world was carved up. When explorers sailed west, they were strictly looking for a trade route to Asian spices. Instead, they hit the Caribbean and found gold. Quickly, Spain and Portugal drew a line down the middle of the globe, claiming all the lucrative, resource-heady territories in South and Central America for themselves. But as the map shifts up to North America, you see a massive gray expanse. The Spanish sent an expedition up north in 1539, found no gold, and left. The major global powers simply ignored the continent for over 100 years. That complete lack of interest is what allowed a latecomer, the British, to finally start planting small, isolated colonies along the eastern coast. The United States took root in land that the dominant empires of the day simply didn't want. Over the next century, those isolated British colonies exploded in population to over 1 million people. As they expanded inward, they naturally collided with the French, who had claimed the middle of the continent. The resulting conflict dragged the colonists into the French and Indian War. The British eventually won and pushed the French out, but the war was incredibly expensive. To cover the massive military debt, Britain turned to the colonists and aggressively raised their taxes. The American Revolution was a direct, practical revolt. The colonists refused to pay for the financial bailout of an overextended empire when they had no voting representation in its government. Winning the war left the country as a disorganized collection of 13 failing states, hemmed in on all sides by hostile foreign empires. To avoid immediate collapse and stand any chance against the global giants next door, the Founding Fathers had to scrap their original system. They wrote a new constitution, forging a functional federal government that could finally operate as a single nation. With George Washington leading a newly stabilized government, the United States figured out how to use European chaos to its advantage. Over in France, Napoleon was preparing to invade Britain, and wars cost money. Looking at this map, you can see the sheer scale of the Louisiana Purchase. The Americans needed control of the Mississippi River to secure their trade routes, so they offered to buy New Orleans. Napoleon, desperate to fund his military campaigns, countered by selling the entire Louisiana Territory for $15 million. In a single transaction, the U.S. doubled its size. The internal engine driving this massive land grab was demographics. The average American family had 7 children, creating immense pressure to push westward to find open space. Watching those borders push west to the Pacific Ocean tracks a rapid, aggressive conquest. Settlers displaced Native American tribes, overwhelmed the Mexican territory of Texas until it declared independence, and ultimately triggered a war with Mexico that secured California and the broader Southwest. In just 50 years, the United States mutated from a thin strip of coastal colonies into a transcontinental empire. They achieved it all by simply playing distracted European powers against each other and overpowering their weaker neighbors. But swallowing that much territory exposed a fatal flaw. The northern states had outlawed slavery, while the southern agrarian economy relied heavily on enslaved labor. As the borders moved west, the country couldn't agree on whether to allow slavery into these massive new territories. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, the southern states viewed his administration as a direct threat to the institution of slavery. That perceived threat prompted them to secede and form their own country. The result was the Civil War. It was the ultimate internal crisis, threatening to permanently break the rising American empire into 2 competing, hostile nations, sharing the exact same continent. The North's victory preserved the Union's borders and abolished slavery, replacing the South's plantation economy with a new social and labor structure. Surviving this devastating collapse proved to be the crucible the nation needed. By purging its deepest structural division, the United States finally cemented its disparate regions into a single, unified industrial powerhouse. With the continent secured and the internal fracture healed, the United States immediately looked outward. The first move was purchasing the massive territory of Alaska from Russia for just $7 million. Then came the Pacific. American businessmen had taken control of the Hawaiian Islands and asked the U.S. to annex them. This sparked a fierce debate over whether America should remain an isolationist republic or seize strategic outposts to block rival powers like Germany and Japan. The isolationist debate ended in 1898. Cuba was fighting for independence from Spain, and the U.S., citing strategic interests and public sympathy for the revolutionaries, stepped in and demanded the Spanish leave. Spain declared war, but the U.S. rapidly crushed them. American forces captured Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, permanently dismantling what was left of the Spanish Empire. In 4 centuries, the nation had evolved from a string of ignored colonies into the conqueror of the very empire that first discovered the Americas. To cement this new global status, President Theodore Roosevelt laid out an aggressive vision. He wanted to build the second-largest navy in the world to project American power across the globe. But a global navy needs mobility. When Colombia refused to sell the land for a canal, Roosevelt ruthlessly recognized the newly independent nation of Panama, cutting a deal to carve a geographic shortcut straight through Central America. When the Panama Canal was finished in 1914, it finally linked the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. For the first time, this massive fleet of steam-powered warships could deploy rapidly to any coastline on Earth. This globe-spanning naval reach arrived just as Europe was descending into the destruction of World War I. Over 400 years, the United States exploited European wars, survived its own internal collapse, and aggressively conquered a continent. What started as a stretch of coast no one wanted had engineered itself into a transcontinental empire, perfectly positioned to dominate the modern world.